Welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 186, and today's date is October 11th, 2013, and the title of this episode is The Next False Flag is a Ticking Time Bomb. And from all the indicators and everything that I've been looking at, it looks like we are definitely headed towards a major false flag. And from all the propaganda and everything up until this point, it definitely looks like they are preparing for something. Now, an update on the Truckers for the Constitution, Ride for the Constitution. They are out there today. A few trucks have arrived today, and this was done on purpose. And on Ben Swann's site, he was talking to Pete Santilli, who is doing live broadcasts on the trucker strike. And they have done this on purpose, and there are many more trucks arriving. They are headed from South Carolina. They are headed from all over the place into D.C. And yesterday I reported on the National Guard that was going to close down 495, and some people have said, that was false. I put it on the webpage saying that this might be false or disinformation, but we are finding out today from Pete Santilli and from others that people have taken photos of the National Guard troops in buses along the roadside, and they are preparing if something goes on. And what Pete Santilli is saying is that truckers are going to arrive, and on Saturday and Sunday, the majority of them are going to be there. They kept most of the truckers back. They wanted to see how the press was going to react, and realistically, there is no coverage of this whatsoever. And the only coverage that you do see is that there was like no turnout and things like that, but we'll see what happens on Saturday. I will be doing a news brief on Saturday, so I will report on this again, and we'll have to wait and see how this turns out. And we have to remember, these truckers that are going there, the veterans that are going, the bikers that are going, they're all showing up at the same time. Most of them will be there on Saturday and especially on Sunday, and this definitely is a perfect storm to create some type of false flag event, to put agents into a truck, to have veterans with weapons and bikers with weapons, to create a riot type of atmosphere, to bring down the National Guard, and maybe even declare martial law. And we'll be talking about martial law a little later in this report. But let's get into the economic collapse news today. We are going out to Europe because the Europe banks are facing major losses, and they're looking at in the countries of Spain, Italy, and Portugal. They face some 250 billion euros, a potential loss on their loans. And can anyone say bail-in? Because as these banks let everyone know that they have this type of losses, we are definitely going to see them take action and implement bail-ins on people. And I hate to say this, but even in the U.S., these banks are insolvent. They have nothing, and eventually they're going to come clean, not by their choice, and all of a sudden we will see bail-ins here in the U.S., just like you saw in Cyprus, and now they're going to spread throughout Europe, because when they realize that these banks are collapsing, they need a way to fund these banks, and the only way to do it at this point is to take it from the people's accounts. Now, I've said this many times in my other reports. The central bankers will not allow gold to rise, because that is a signal that things are not going well. And it's funny, every time you see it rise, people are like, oh, it's on the upswing, it's going to go really high. No, it's not. Stop. It's not going to. It will only rise to the point where they want it to be. And what they do, they take paper gold, which is mixed in with the physical. So they have these contracts on this gold, and they could have millions of contracts on a single ounce because they don't care. They're never taking delivery. And they dump them onto the market to drive the price down. They sell them, and you see it head down. And what we saw today is in the space of 4 minutes, almost 2 million ounces were flushed into the gold futures market, dumping the price to a 3-month low. And they continually do the same thing. It is on purpose. They need to keep the gold prices down so the American people and the world do not wake up and see that something is about to happen. And you will not see gold rise until the very last minute. And you should not be concerned about the price anyhow. The price of gold is irrelevant at this point. The point being is to have precious metals, because when you need it, this is an insurance policy, when you need it, it will be there. And listen, if they're going to flush and all of this gold at the same time to drop the price, it puts everything on sale. It's amazing to me how people will go out and purchase a TV, an iPod, a phone, if they see that it's on sale, which loses value every single day, but they will not go out and purchase gold or silver, which historically gains value over time. If you look at the graph going back to the Great Depression, up until now, gold was, what, $20, and then they pumped it up to $35 once they confiscated the gold, but it was at $20. Today, it's at $1,300. If they push it down below $1,300 all the way to $1,000, you gobble it up. If they push silver from 22 down to 10, buy as much as you can, because guess what's going to happen? The only place it has to go is up, because precious metals is real money. The dollar is a piece of paper with ink on it. Why do you think China, Russia, and all of these nations are purchasing gold like there is no tomorrow? They're not out there going, God, I got to get my hands on that U.S. dollar. Where's that paper and ink, man? Let's get a lot of that. No, they're not doing that. You know what they're doing? They're creating their insurance policy. They are backing everything up with gold. Throughout history, gold, silver, platinum, palladium holds its value. Now, it came out, and it's amazing how these banks like Wells Fargo, Citibank, and they always say, oh, we got these profits and things like that. But they never talk about, how these profits are derived and what tricky accounting they're using. And, Enron was doing fantastic too, but look what happened to them. Lehman, they showed incredible profits until the end. Bear Stearns, same thing. So they use fake accounting, they trick, they cook the books, and they make it seem like everything is fine until the day comes where they can't anymore. But if you look at Wells Fargo and you see the mortgage originations, we are at a multi-year low at $80 billion, which is a 29% drop in mortgage, people taking out mortgages. And from a year-to-year basis, it's a 42% drop. So we can see, and you have to remember, these banks work on loans. This is how they make money. If they're not loaning out money and loans are dropping, how are they making money? Now, we've been saying over and over that the economy is not improving. We see this with retail sales. We see it with layoffs. We see it with mortgage applications declining, housing declining. We see that the Fed is still purchasing treasury bonds and buying all the toxic real estate from banks. And this tells us right here that things are not going well. They need to manipulate all the numbers. They manipulate GDP, and they had to manipulate them again and go all the way back to 1929 and recalculate GDP all the way forward to this date to get a positive GDP. They also recalculated unemployment. They do not count those people who fall off and stop and are no longer looking for work because guess what? There just isn't any work. And I have a friend who has been out of work. He's in technology, and let me tell you, you don't realize how bad the job market is until you don't have work. And I was talking to him the other day, and he says there's job listings like on Dice.com, Munster.com, and he goes on there and he sees these job listings and he is sending out resume after resume after resume. He went and had his resume professionally redone because that's why they told him that was the problem, so they redid it, and now he's been sending it out, and he says that he's been sending out like 10 to 20 a week. And some weeks he can't. Some weeks are lower, like 2 or 3, because there's not many jobs. And most of these he never, ever hears from. And the ones he does hear from, never get back to him, ever. And he said he's never seen anything like this before, because when he was looking for a job years ago and he would send out like 10 resumes, he would get 3, 4 calls out of that. Now he says, I am sending out so many, I don't get any calls. And I have another friend who worked for DHL, who was a manager in DHL, got laid off, and he's saying that he has been looking all over the place and he cannot find anything. He's been sending it everywhere. So when people are saying that things are getting better and things are just improving, it is false and fake, and most of the jobs out there are not full-time jobs, and I'm talking about Wall Street. Most of them are contract jobs where they can get rid of you in a second. They don't pay you retirement. They don't pay health benefits. You are like a temp worker, and you're only needed for a certain period of time, and this is what they're calling high employment, which it really isn't. And then we can see the 10 American companies cutting the most jobs. J.P. Morgan Chase, 19,000 jobs. J.C. Penney, 15,000 jobs. IBM, 9,400 jobs. Boeing, 5,800 jobs. American Express, 5,400 jobs. Wells Fargo, 5,200 jobs. Cisco, 4,500 jobs. MetLife, 3,100 jobs. Blockbuster, 3,000 jobs. And that is part of the Dish Network Corp right now. United Technologies, 3,000 jobs. And again, we can see this in the amount of office space that is just sitting there empty right now, which is rising. And this makes the case that things are not what it seems to be, and especially what the Fed and the government want you to believe. We are seeing that consumer confidence is at an all-time low. It's the biggest 3-month drop in 25 months. And we're seeing that consumers, they're looking at this, and yesterday I did a poll that people are saying that we're heading in the wrong direction. 83% are saying we're heading in the wrong direction. And guess what? We are. Okay. Now, in regards to Obamacare, we understand that they spent over $600 million on the website to enroll people. We know it's full of glitches. It is not ready to go live, but they forced it to go live because who does it really benefit? It benefits the insurance companies. God, what a great business to be in, where everyone is forced to buy health insurance. You don't even have to beg them to buy it. They are forced to do it. Think about a business. Think about if you had a business and people are forced to come and purchase your product. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Well, guess what? Health insurance companies, they don't have to go and beg and compete with each other. They don't have to do anything. They don't even have to lower their prices because it's mandatory now for everyone to use their money to go out and buy from one of these companies. And if you don't, you're penalized if you don't do what the government says. That sounds like a freedom that I want. How about you? And out of, all millions of people that visited the website in 36 states, only 51,000 were actually able to complete the enrollment, and a lot of them who decided not to were penalized, and now they realize, holy crap, I owe $3,000-$4,000 because I canceled? This is ridiculous. Okay, let's move on here. Now we see that the central bankers, the U.S. government, are not looking for peace in the Middle East. They have a plan. Their plan is to move into Syria, replace the government, put that country on the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and sell their natural resources using the U.S. dollar. Right now, that country is not using the U.S. dollar, so the central bankers are not getting the piece of the action. Plus, the more countries that don't use the U.S. dollar, the more of those dollars flow back to the United States, which will then increase the amount of money in circulation, which will then increase inflation. And the more countries that do not use the U.S. dollar, it makes the dollar continually decline. And eventually, when no one is using the dollar, it implodes on itself. And all of that comes back to the U.S. because no one else is using it. Right now, the United States is using force in all these countries with military might to keep this dollar propped up. And they are losing, the central bankers, United States government, they are losing the battle with this, and they know this. China is making deals all over the place, not using military force. They are backing everything they have with gold. Every time these central bankers push gold down, China, Russia, all the other nations swoop in and buy as much as they can. And let me just say, it's not just these countries. Investment firms and banks are now doing the same thing. We see Goldman Sachs. Ooh, this is a perfect time to sell. And guess what happens? Every time they say that, gold takes a dive, and everyone that is selling, they purchase as much as they possibly can. What does that tell you? They did this during the housing boom. Listen, everyone, subprime securities, incredible. Come and get them. They hedged their bet that they would collapse. Why would they do that? Because they knew all of this was toxic. They're doing the same thing now. They're telling everyone gold is not worth to keep. It's time to sell. They're bearish on gold, and as they do it, and they're telling these people to do it, they are gobbling it up and buying as much as they can because they understand what is going to happen. And if we go back to 2007, 2008, when they were selling all the subprime securities, they made a fortune when all of these securities collapsed because they hedged their bet against them. Now, since we're talking about the U.S. dollar and how the U.S. needs to keep this propped up and keep all these countries using it, we understand that the central bankers, U.S. government, wanted to get into Syria, and they were using the chemical weapon attack as a false flag to get the war started. Now, Russia stepped in. They brought their ships in, and they said, no, this is not going to happen. And they struck up a deal to remove the chemical weapons from Syria. And we also have to remember that Syria and Russia invited the UN inspectors in 2 days before the chemical attack. And again, we have to use common sense. Why would Assad use chemical weapons right in front of the UN inspectors when they invited them in to inspect for chemical weapons? It makes no sense. Since that was derailed, the U.S. right now and the central bankers and Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Middle Eastern countries who get a lot of money from the U.S. are trying to use propaganda to get something else started. And since the U.S. is trying to talk peace with Iran right now, Iran, the people of Iran, are chanting, "Death to America, death to America." And we can see that this propaganda is starting to formulate and starting to move forward with something else that's going to happen. And they are not just going to use one false flag to get this done. Right now, even though everyone believes that there's a peace talk going on with Iran, they are planning something. What have we seen? We've seen that Susan Rice has given the U.S. government wiggle room in getting to Assad because it only mentions the government of Syria, not the individual Assad. So she points that out. What we're also seeing is the rebels in Syria are making it very difficult for the chemical weapons inspectors to do their job. And what's happening is the Syrian rebels, which are the paid mercenaries of the U.S. government in Saudi Arabia and Israel and the central bankers, they are making it very difficult for the chemical weapons inspectors to move around, and it's challenging them to get and see the chemical weapons. And this is being done on purpose because they're trying to make a case that either the Assad government is making it difficult, and because of this outbreak, it's making it difficult, and Assad is not keeping up his end of the bargain. And we can see this is just one part of it. But wait, there is more. And this goes on to say that unless they succeed in pushing those fighters back, any attempt by the OPCW experts to visit the area would be very risky, and they would not be able to go ahead and inspect and remove the chemical weapons. Now, Russian Lavrov said that there are reports that there are Syrian rebels training in Afghanistan right now with the intention to train these rebels in Afghanistan to use chemical weapons in a new false flag in Syria. And this goes on to say the suspected training happened in Afghan territories not under the control of the government in Kabul. Some reports indicate that al-Qaeda-linked radical al-Nusra is planning to smuggle toxic compounds and relevant specialists into Iraqi territory to stage terrorist attacks there this time and moving them into Syria. And we can see that something is going on at this point. Because what we know is that they already have the plan, and I'm talking about the central bankers. They came out with the number of countries that they were going to go in, remove the government, put the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and they are going to follow through with this plan. They are not going to let up. Now, the former NSA chief is saying that cyber threats are growing more ominous at this point. The threats now are moving to a destructive attacks. And in my report before, I laid out the three different levels of attacks. You know, one is disruption, the other one is stealing some information. One is disruptive, one is stealing information, and the other one is actually doing destruction, like bringing down a power grid or bringing down the stock market, bringing down the banking entire system and wiping everything clean of what they have in their databases. And this goes on to say that General Michael Hayden, former director of both the NSA and the CIA, told attendees that the U.S. computer networks, not just government systems, but corporate systems and ordinary citizens' computers, face layers of threats, and everyone is susceptible to a cyber attack. We know who some of these big players are, and they are specifically attacking American and Western European companies. And we can see that something is happening. And I reported a couple reports ago saying that the defense network is vulnerable to cyber attacks because of the shutdown, and the shutdown is still going on, even though they're still working on the debt ceiling. And you know, eventually it will. They will raise the debt ceiling, and they will come to some type of agreement. Now, will that happen after October 17th? That is the question. And what they're saying here, since the shutdown and everyone is really vulnerable at this time, the full economic impact may not be known for months, but according to Gourley, the Pentagon cyber networks are vulnerable, which could lead to larger problems in the future. And he explained the very real consequences of the breaches. If they steal our software, they can learn how to reverse engineer and create their own software to support their own weapons systems. And he goes on to explain how these cyber attackers are infiltrating banks, the stock exchange, the government sites. What happens is, since we're all human and we sit at a computer and we receive email, what they're doing is they are sending emails to people a couple of times with no attachments, building up a friendship, saying that they're from a certain area of the government, and they're building up a friendship and not giving any type of attachments. Once the people are comfortable with the person they're communicating with, what happens is they attach something to the email. The person who receives it opens it up. The virus, malware, is then downloaded onto their computer system, which is now sitting on their hard drive of their computer. And we have to remember their computer is now networked. Now the person goes ahead and sends an email to another person. That virus malware attaches itself to that email and now starts spreading throughout the system until it gets back to the servers and it starts attacking the systems. Okay, now, right now, the Fed is out there trying to shift the blame of why they didn't taper. And I'm going to explain why they are doing this. Right now, they're saying the taper didn't happen because of the government shutdown, which is totally false. They were expecting this war to be started with Syria. This was going to be the event that they were going to use as the taper, as when they were going to taper, because what they were doing, and the government was helping, they were making their case that the economy was getting better and we were moving out of this recession/depression, even though they don't call it that. And Obama was on his campaign, the Fed was out there, the government was giving numbers of unemployment going down, and everything was looking great. They were expecting the war in Syria to move forward. So eventually, when the Fed was going to taper, which they were never going to do, something would happen and they would blame Syria for cyber attacking the stock exchange, the banks, any other area doing a physical attack, or it could have come from Iran so they can push this war forward, and they were going to use this and then blame this on them, saying that they're the ones who just collapsed the economy. Now, that event didn't happen. So what's happening right now, the Fed does not want to be blamed for this collapse coming up because they understand when all is said and done, they want to start this system over with a new monetary currency, which will probably be all digital at that point. So they do not want to be blamed. So what they're doing is they're saying because of what's happening in the government, this is why we didn't taper. But we all know that's fake. And we also know the Fed and the government controlled all the statistics. They manipulated them. They are the market. They are the stock market. They are the housing market. They are everything in the market, the housing market. So all the numbers they were putting out were fake anyhow. It was an illusion. So right now, they're shifting the blame onto the government because they don't want to be blamed. The government has the blame right now. But down the pipe here, the government does not want to be blamed because they want to keep their power. They don't want millions of Americans saying, oh my God, look what the government did to us. They collapsed the economy because of the shutdown. No, 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 no. They're making the case right now saying that because of this shutdown, and as we go longer, the economy is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So what's going to happen is they are going to shift now the blame off of the government, because the government is going to set up what's called a false flag event. So this entire collapse will then be blamed on another country. And this is what they are preparing for right now. Now, we have to understand that because of this shutdown, that the nuclear agency right now, as of Thursday, is no longer doing inspections. The agency is not doing a daily reactor status report, and they're not available at this time. What else do we know? We understand that the cyber commander in Iran was assassinated. Men were inside Iran in their nuclear facilities trying to sabotage the Iranians' nuclear facilities. So we understand they're trying to do something here. We understand that there was a transfer of a nuclear weapon, and they didn't want the paperwork. There was no paperwork for this transfer. So what they did was, at the same exact time that this nuclear weapon was being transferred, they relieved the top nuke commanders from their position. One was for gambling, and the other one was fired. So now we have two top nuclear commanders with the United States have been suspended and fired, and we had a nuclear weapon transferred with no paperwork. Now we see there is an introduction of a new bill to authorize a military force against Iran. And this goes on to say, a bill attempting to authorize the use of America's full military force against Iran is being introduced to Congress on Thursday by Representative Franks. Franks argues that the bill, which offers advance consent to President Obama to strike Iran, would give the U.S. the edge it needs in diplomatic negotiations. Senator Lindsey Graham agrees. He has indicated in the past that he would support such an authorization in case the negotiations fail. You can see what they're doing. It's going to give the president the authority, if negotiations to fail, to go ahead and use military force, because they've learned from what happened. They learned what happened in Syria, that the American people and Congress did not want war. So now they have to take it one step further, so this doesn't happen again. And we can see how they are planning for this. And what they're saying is, for the sake of our national security, the security of our allies, and global stability, more generally, we must have every available option open to us in advance. So they are already preparing for what is going to come. Now, yesterday I reported that that there was an internal memo, and it was reported on Channel 10 News, and now I see it on the homepage of Fox News right here. And what they're saying is that pilots warn of a dry run possible terrorist on U.S. flights. And this is what happened. On September 2nd, flight from Reagan National Airport in Washington in Orlando, a Middle Eastern man rose from his seat and sprinted toward the cockpit before veering sharply to go into the forward restroom, according to the memo. While he was in there, several other men moved about the cabin, changing seats and going into overhead bins, it says. U.S. Airways and the Transportation Security Administration confirmed the incident. 4 passengers aboard the flight were detained by local law enforcement authorities upon arrival in Orlando due to suspicious behavior during the flight, according to a statement by Michelle Moore, a spokeswoman for U.S. Airways. One expert speculated that the efforts may have been aimed at sizing up security procedures and spotting air marshals aboard the flights. And they are seeing this and are calling them dry runs. And we can see that something is in the working stages. All of this, all these indicators, and we know that they do, the central bankers, U.S. government, they're not going to stand for peace, they need to bring this full circle because they are not going to be blamed for this collapse. And right now, the blame is shifted to the government. The ball is in their court, and we're going to definitely see something happen. And we have to remember that the government wants total control over the people. This is their whole main objective. This is why they're coming up with Common Core. This is why they're trying to teach the kids that guns are bad. This is why the gun bills are pending in the Senate. CISPA is pending in the Senate. They want total control to declare martial law and to enact the executive order so the president can take control of the U.S. and eventually he will not have to deal with Congress anymore, because you could see how much he likes dealing with Congress. And that brings me up to the point of the 3 stages of martial law, of what they want to do and how they want to control everyone. And these are the things that we need to look out for. Stage 1 of martial law consists of the gradual rollout of government controls over citizen liberties. Travel is restricted through inland border checkpoints. Well, we're pretty much seeing that right now. Stage 1 also begins to create an enemies list, and we have already seen this. And on the list, they report Christians, Ron Paul supporters, Second Amendment supporters, libertarians, constitutionalists, and they have all been branded domestic terrorists. The enemies list has been created and will be acted upon in a future date. In Stage 1, the government elevates itself above any pretense of constitutional liberties, and we are definitely seeing this also. They're going into countries without declaring, without anything, just going in there with troops. They are telling everyone, you will accept Obamacare, and we're exempting ourselves. They're putting themselves above what is happening. And we can see this happening all over the place. In Stage 2, martial law implementation becomes obvious to all citizens, except for the ones who invoke cognitive dissonance as a psychological coping mechanism. Stage 2 is marked by restrictions on travel, the loss of free speech, and the right to assemble to air grievances against the government. Well, we're actually seeing some of this. We see Senator Feinstein trying to pass a bill that will limit who is allowed to speak about what is going on and who are real journalists. We see the government taking people away, like the Occupy people on Wall Street, not letting them do free protests, and we're seeing this all over. Now with the truckers and the veterans and the bikers heading to D.C., there are reports of now people seeing National Guard in buses along the roadway and them preparing for something. In Stage 2, the free internet as we know it will disappear. Gee, well, CISPA is pending in the Senate right now. We know they want to take control of the internet, and what happens when the internet goes? Well, most of the alternative media will disappear also. And what also do we see in a Stage 2? Total loss of due process of law with regard to detainment, imprisonment, or worse. And they already have that law on the books. It's called the NDAA, and they are allowed to pick up people who they suspect as international terrorists or domestic terrorists. They do not need proof. They don't need anything. You do not get due process. You are thrown into jail. You don't even get a call for a lawyer. This stage is also marked by limited participation of members of the society who have been previously identified as enemies of the state. This would include the ability to hold certain kinds of employment, a special designation on a form of national ID, the imposition of restrictions, who can marry, where one can live. When the national ID card is implemented, it is time to run for the hills, because history shows that nobody will be safe at this point. What else do we see in Stage 2? Total loss of private property and free will in terms of choice of where you would like to live, hence Agenda 21. Choice of employment and exercising any form of political choice will be completely not allowed. In stage 3, warrantless detentions become commonplace in which suspected political dissidents are removed from society, and this is where the lists come in. Usually in the middle of the night, they will come and take you away depending on which list you are. In modern terminologies, these would be referred to as the red list tag citizens who are detained and normally executed. These include outspoken preachers, outspoken talk show hosts, people who have any kind of history of civil disobedience. Now, we will not see martial law come into effect with only one false flag event. We will see multiple false flags happening at the same time in many locations. When you see this happen, you know it is time to hunker down, and hopefully you have everything ready. If you see another type of 9/11, but worse, we know this is the signal that it is coming. And when this happens, and we see these multiple false flags happening at the same time across the country, you will witness the implementation of Obama's Executive Order 13603 in Section 601 of Executive Order 13603 signals the executive order in which, upon request by the Director of Selective Service and in coordination with the Secretary of Defense, assists the Director of Selective Service in development of policies regulating the induction and deferment of persons for duty in the armed forces. This means they are getting the draft ready for you to go fight the enemy. No ifs, ands, or buts. You will be drafted and forced to fight in this new war. And this executive order will take control of all movement of persons and property by all modes of transportation, and it will take control of all energy. It will take control of everything, food distribution and everything. And this is what it will be like when this happens. So if we see what we think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks, and we see multiple false flags happening in Chicago, in New York, in Detroit, in California, in LA, in Phoenix, in Miami, in Houston or Dallas, we know something is about to happen. And if you see this, or I should say when you see this, you know it is time to start rushing out there. And if you haven't gotten your supplies and everything that you need, you know you better start hauling ass right now to get what you need. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.